Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part there for the 26th of October 2025. Lots of information to get through, so let's get on with it. So we have the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply. You can find them linked in the description below. We have 900 personnel lost. So that is below the 1,000 threshold. We do understand that there's been very bad weather for the last couple of days, and that's affected, well, you'd think it'd affect attacks onto enemy territory. However, it's actually prompted more attacks because it's affected drone coverage. So with a lack of drone activity due to bad weather, that's the time for Russians to attack with their equipment. So there's some, it might mess around with the stats in several ways. So you won't get these large scale FPV drone and drone bombers attacking enemy equipment and personnel. And so you then get convoys attacking that causes issues elsewhere. So there's kind of a movement of stats possibly around that. But anyway, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second. So 4 tanks, 18 armored combat vehicles. Are you thinking, wow, okay, well, if weather is a good protector of these vehicles because you won't get drones, then why is there a little bit of heavy losses in these categories? 15 artillery systems, that's dropped down. That's probably going to be weather related because that is often over the daily average, usually somewhere between sort of 25 and 40 odd. And then you have 81 vehicles and fuel tanks. That's a drop from where it was. So I think the weather has a lot to say about what's been going on. Now, we're going to talk about the front line around Pokrovsk. First of all, we'll look at the good news for Ukraine. Defense forces have regained control over settlements of Kyiv Yar and Suketska in the last 10 days, says the General Staff. Since August 21st, the situation in this area has been stabilized. Control over 9 settlements has been restored. Another 9 have been cleared of enemy sabotage groups. Over the last 10 days, 1,756 Russian servicemen and 75 units of equipment have been destroyed. So there's been really good news about this around this bunny ears kind of area. Kyiv Yar has been secured. There's also gains for the Ukrainians further down the bunny ears sector to Rodinska. So Ukrainian defense forces have liberated Kyiv Yar and Suhetska and Zatishia in the Donetsk region and repelled the enemy near Nikhanarivka, Novoshakhove, that's on this side, and Fedorivka down here. We'll look at that slightly more closely in a second. Russian forces advanced though themselves near Novotoretska, Volodymyrivka, and Hatishia. So the Russians trying to advance in this sector up to Shakhove. Ukrainians coming in from the west there. So this is still on the good news. The AFU have regained control over Kyiv Yar, as mentioned, ending the Russian encirclement. Russian troops were killed or captured. Ukraine also liberated these other settlements around here and east of Vilna and Novoshakhove. Fighting continues in Fedorivka. Russians advanced towards Shakhove and Volodymyrivka. Their advances failed, though, says Noel reports that actually the attacks up here didn't go to plan, according to this source. And here, Poulet-Vallon, a French mapper, gives you the indication of what's going on. So this is up in Kyiv Yar. That has been liberated. The Russians have been pushed out, encircled, eliminated, taken prisoner in that encirclement there. There's a further encirclement here, which is being pressured from particularly the west and the north, while they're trying to move into the east to Shakhove, which is a key settlement the Ukrainians control, while meanwhile the Russians are trying to push up from both the south and the east and southeast there. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are pushing at the Russians here in a number of places. What's this? Sorry, my memory. Zatishok there. So Suketska is this settlement just to the west of Zatishok, and you have Ukrainians having some success east of Novoshakhove here. So that's the good news for the Ukrainians. If we go slightly further to the south here, so we were that's Rodinska up there. You can see that. If we go back to where we were, Rodinska is just sort of here, this kind of area. That's it there. Okay, so as we come further to the south, a bit of success for the Ukrainians around this small settlement, but the Russians pushing into the south above Myrnohrad. They're pushing into Myrnohrad from the east there, and they're pushing into Pokrovsk, really into Pokrovsk from the south. And it's really troubling in Pokrovsk itself. So success for the Ukrainians up in the northern part of this sector, but when you look at Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad itself, that is under immense amounts of pressure. Okay, so defense forces have regained control over the settlements of Territorial and Suketsko over the last 10 days. But yeah, 1,756 servicemen and 75 units have been eliminated from the Russians. And actually, there's some larger stats here. Ukrainian forces retook 18 settlements near Ocheratina, so this is generally this area, since August 21st, eliminating over 15,700 troops in the wider area, while around 200 Russians have infiltrated Pokrovsk through defensive gaps, and firefights are ongoing. So that's the worry that the Russians are talking, that the Ukrainian General Staff is talking about. Situation in Pokrovsk is difficult. The General Staff acknowledges this. Around 200 Russians have already infiltrated into the city center, where street battles have emerged. Ukrainian forces also confirmed the situation is deteriorating, so it could be the end of Pokrovsk eventually, while the Ukrainians are still sort of pushing and defending the sector to the north. So yeah, interesting dynamics around there. Now, if you look at the gains and losses for the Ukrainians in week 43, as Poulet Volant, the mapper, again states, the Ukrainians have gained 37.12 square kilometers, lost 121.5 square kilometers. So yeah, the Russians, it says, in the LPR and the LPR and DPR have gained 82.26 square kilometers and have lost 29.31 square kilometers. So I think the difference in those numbers is probably down to interpretations of gray zones in the middle. So it could be like you lose an amount of land, but it doesn't mean the Russians, so if you're Ukrainian, you've lost a couple of square kilometers there, but you might have lost it to gray zone rather than to Russian control. And likewise, so these numbers aren't the inverse of the other side's numbers, is the point, right? So it's not like 37 kilometer gains for Ukraine doesn't equate to 37 kilometer losses for the Russians. So they've lost more. Why have the Russians lost less than the Ukrainians have gained? Because they probably gained some of that from no man's land, from gray zone. Okay, so anyway, it gives you an understanding here. According to this mapper, you basically got a third, a ratio of 3 to 1. The Russians appear to be, or the Ukrainians are losing 3 times as much land as they are gaining. The question is, and I don't know the answer. The question is, what does that ratio look like compared to 2 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago? And I haven't kept an eye on that, so sorry about that. Okay. It would be good to see that ratio as a graph over time, wouldn't it? Okay, and I'm sure, sorry to keep going on, I'm sure actually he's got that data there. I'm sure he must have done that data because he's obviously doing it on a weekly basis. That would be a really interesting analysis to see what the worst losses and gain type. I mean, other mappers have done that. War Mappers has done that as well. Does that frequently. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the weather here. So rain and fog, according to Euromonitor Press, just grounded Ukraine's drones around Pokrovsk, and Russian tanks are finally moving. But the same weather grounding Russian drones means Ukrainian, because the Russian drones get grounded as well as the Ukrainian drones, and that means Ukrainian supply trucks can roll in safely. So the Russians get to attack more. And the Ukrainians get to supply their defenses more. So there is a benefit to both sides as well as a cost to both sides. Nature doesn't pick sides, says Euromonitor Press. Right, okay. Well, then Kriegsforscher, who is fighting in that area, says today on the 25th, so this is yesterday, Russians did their fifth large mechanized assault near Pokrovsk, the northern part. Ukrainian 93rd, 33rd, and 95th and other brigades destroyed at least 16 infantry fighting vehicles. So then we go back to the numbers here. You've got 18 infantry fighting vehicles or armored combat vehicles on the list for yesterday. So that could be predominantly from this area. It's hard to count how many were used because of the bad weather conditions, fog as well. But we are sure that there were dozens. So even though there is bad weather, they still seem to have been able to take out these Russian convoys. So yeah, interesting. And indeed, there was a lot of talk about this incident. So Russian forces assaulting the Ukrainian town of Shakove, says OSINT Technical, managed to lose 6 APCs while trying to cross a creek. So they basically drowned 6 of their APCs. The Ukrainian forces then dropped a mix of FPV drones, 155mm artillery fire, and even HIMARS rockets on the Russian assault. And this is actually caught on camera as well. You can go and watch this at your leisure. But yeah, lots of munitions being fired at these, some pretty sizable munitions fired at these pieces of kit, and they have got stuck, as you can see, in difficult terrain. So yeah, so that has happened. And then we come to this. Fighters from the 15th Artillery Reconnaissance Brigade, Chorny Lis, struck a Russian Buk M3 air defense system with a precision attack drone there. So that is good news for the Ukrainians, taking out another piece of quality air defense. Just to let you know, if there's noise in the background, we've got lots of family just coming around, so I will be out there for most of the day. A Russian soldier tried to neutralize a Ukrainian ground drone by tossing a grenade, unaware it was already carrying explosives. Operators from Ukraine's 38th Marine Brigade watched as the resulting blast turned into a powerful fireworks show. So this video has been doing the rounds. Here we have... Oh, of course that's going to happen. Of course that was going to happen. Here we have the soldier running up, throwing a grenade in the UGV. So this is an unmanned ground vehicle that is just sat there. He thinks it's not up to much. He's obviously just got out of his vehicle back there, run up to this thing, throwing a grenade on it. But then, if you notice, the UGV starts moving just as he throws it in towards him. And you can see it's just, there was like a second of it moving. He's there, the UGV is here, and then it explodes. And that's probably the end of him, I would have thought, because that's really sizable. That's a sizable explosion precisely because it was carrying explosives itself. Now, if you want to get a good sense of these new Mad Max vehicles, this is a real vehicle. Absolutely insane. But I presume this thing still moves. It's covered in concertina wire, in literally like sticks, and I guess wire and bits of piping, and obviously a lot of metal and all sorts. Just an incredible arrangement of stuff here. Just absolutely insane. But there you go. That is, and as stupid as that looks, as funny as that looks, one must assume that it is functionally beneficial for these guys to do that. You saw the other day when I showed a convoy of 4 vehicles attacking the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians took something like 25 drones and mines, because it had a mine roll on the front, to stop the vehicle. So 25 explosions, and it eventually stopped. So that's I guess the advantage of, decorating your vehicle in such a manner. Now, I want to talk a little bit about planes, because this shows an interesting scenario where you have 3 F-16s flying here, 3 Ukrainian F-16s. Now, please go and watch the Times Radio interview of Justin Bronk. One of the challenges, he says, is that the Ukrainians have had to move across to flying NATO style, where you're not flying in singles, where you're just dropping a bomb here or targeting something there. That actually the NATO doctrine is a much more joined up doctrine, and in order to move across to flying Gripens and F-16s, they've had to relearn how to fly, essentially. So that's why it's been very difficult to get experienced fighters to pilots to move across from Soviet era planes to Western NATO planes. And actually the doctrine's so different, and as well the sensors and all the equipment is so different, that it's not useful to move experienced pilots across. It's not easy, and actually they don't become necessarily decent pilots for these NATO planes. So then you have to train up pilots for your NATO planes or your Western provided planes from scratch, and that is a huge has huge time implications, because it takes you however long to train up the pilots, and then they can fly to the level of being, I guess, something like a year and a half, and you could be a wingman, which means that you can fly in a 2Z and you are not leading it. And then to become leader of a 2, and then a 3, and then a 4, it's like being he said it's like being a PhD pilot. So it's all about experience, and you don't get to become like a leader of a 3 or a 4 until years down the line. Well, now we have F-16-3 being obviously utilized here, so that's interesting. That's probably ahead of the curve in terms of timing, but it is a real challenge because Ukraine can't take advantage of the way that these planes are best used until they have built up that experience, and that just comes with time. They aren't really effectively used to shoot down drones like Guran and Shahed type drones, because these weapons are too expensive to do so. So you don't want to be using F-16s in that way. And so, when you're talking about Gripens, that's fantastic. How quickly can they get to Ukraine? Okay, well, they're already trained up supposedly on Gripens, the CD variant, and they'll get CDs next year. But how can they be utilized? At the moment, the scourge for Ukraine is a guided glide bomb. And it's really interesting that he was talking about this, Justin Bron, because I've been talking about that a lot recently, whereby the Ukrainians really need to do something about that. They're at their peak, they can fire like 260, 270 guided glide bombs a day. Right? Wow. So you need to shoot down these planes. Well, that means you need to be utilizing Meteor air-to-air missiles, but then you're firing them at their kind of extent of their range. But that means you also need to be high up, because if you're low down, because you don't have, there's still Russian air defenses, you're flying low down, and the Russian planes are flying with impunity high up, dropping their guided glide bombs 100 odd kilometers behind the contact line. That means that you are going to have to expend an awful lot of energy getting your missile from low down. You're fighting against gravity, but also, much more dense air down here. So it's gravity and air friction, air resistance. You're fighting to get that up to here. So when you look at how far you can fire a Meteor, that's from optimal ranges of being up here and firing the missile at a plane that is coming at you at the same level, etc., right? And that's simply not what's going to be going on here. So there are loads of challenges to shooting down these Russian planes, but they need to be shot down. Like guided glide bombs are the absolute scourge, and that is why the Russians are grinding on. So when you're looking at the difference between what one side is doing on the front lines and the other, such as these poulet volant calculations, then you need to understand that I don't know if where has it gone? It was over here. Anyway, I've obviously deleted it now somehow. But you need. Oh, here it is. So this will be, I'm sure, contingent upon the use of guided glide bombs. That's how Russia are succeeding primarily on the front lines. Yes, they've got an asymmetry in the amount of troops they have compared to the Ukrainians, but they are winning in terms of taking territory. It comes at a massive, massive cost to them. But if you're only looking at territory, then of course Russia are winning this war. I wouldn't say that is the correct metric to look at whether you're winning or losing. And I would say both sides are losing. Who loses the least worst, right? But nonetheless, if you're looking just at territory, then Russia is taking more territory than Ukraine. How do you stop that? You stop the guided glide bombs. So there are two elements to this. Well, three elements to this. One, shoot down sorry, one would be destroy the air bases. So this is why you need flamingos. This is why you need tomahawks. This is why you need long range drones, and you need to scale them. Right? You need to absolutely, you need 100 munitions flying at a single base on a given night, and a range of them, literally long range drones and FP1s, FP2s. If they can reach, and flamingos and tomahawks and whatever, right? You need all of those things to take out a base. That takes out the planes. That takes out the ability to fly those planes. Okay. The second thing you do is you shoot down the planes themselves. Well, you're going to need to either bring Patriots close to the front line. That is a risk I think is worth taking. I really think that they should be very risky with their air defenses, but then of course then they don't get to use them to shoot down ballistic missiles and on cities and whatnot. But this is it's difficult. And then the next option you have, so that's air defense, or you shoot them down with planes that you're going to have to use riskily. And I advocate for using planes riskily as well. You need to get enough scale of planes to be able to use them riskily so that you can shoot down Russian planes that are using guided glide bombs with impunity. And then the third option is to shoot down the bombs themselves. So that's the worst option of the three, because that's putting a sticking plaster on something's already happened. Prevention's better than cure. This is a cure, shooting down the guided glide bombs. But actually that is something that is taking place. So Ukraine can shoot down Russia's jet-powered glide bombs, says Air Force spokesman Yuri Ignat. These bombs, launched from Su-34s, behave like cruise missiles and can be intercepted. Yesterday, 2 of the 3 carbs aimed at Odessa were downed. I reported that yesterday, with the third falling harmlessly. So there is hope that even the worst option of the 3, you can do something about that. And indeed, in my military aid update yesterday, the Germans and French are working furiously on a new way of taking down guided glide bombs, and it is being tested operationally, I do believe. So that is super, super cool, super useful. But you definitely need to go back to taking out the air bases and taking out the planes as well. Okay, here this has come from Aidan Squatson's, who's absolutely horribly pro-Russian source. Is just a Russian propaganda source. However, don't ignore the videos that they put out. So this is a Ukrainian train that has been hit in Sumy, transporting fuel in the Sumy region. Ukrainian locomotives are a prime target for the Grans with optical guidance. This is a problem. You now have Grans, these Shahed type drones that are able to be used like FPV drones. I've talked about this before, and I talked about a train getting hit in this region. Now, I don't know if this is that same train that was hit, but at the night time, and this is the result of it in the daytime, some hours later, or this is another train in Sumy. You could say was one that I reported being hit some time back. And then finally, so that's bad news. Something needs to be done about that big time. The rail networks are being hammered in Ukraine. Attache agents have carried out successful sabotage of the railway infrastructure in the Armyansk district in Crimea. As a result of the impact of the relay equipment, the movement of trains providing supplies to occupation troops was disrupted. So that's good news. Ukrainian sabotage, or pro-Ukrainian sabotage operatives still working in occupied districts as well as inside Russia. Right, we're going to move on to the distance strikes. Last night there were 101 drones only, no missiles sent into Ukraine. You would if you could, you aren't, so you can't. That means that Russia, I assume, is firing ballistics at the maximal rate they can. When you have nights of no ballistics, it means they literally can't do that. They would do it if they could. I mean, goodness me, they have no problem blowing anything up with ballistic missiles. So that they're not means that they aren't producing enough of them to do the maximal amount of damage that they would like. I mean, this is the maximal given their context, right? But conceptually, they would love to be able to do much, much more damage than they are doing. And I think that's the same with drones, that you aren't seeing 500 drones a night, which was something that they were talking about doing and Ukrainians were warning about. It means that they can't do that. And there still has been an element of Ukraine hurting the Russian production lines. It's not enough. And I keep saying Yelabuga needs to be taken out, but you aren't seeing 500 a night. What you are seeing is at least 100 a night. You on average, the average has gone up since 6 months ago, 10 months ago, to a year ago, 2 years ago, right? So the averages have gone up, but they've been kept back from where they were looking like they were going, when it was looking like it was going to be 500 a night. Now it's like we had that night of 800, didn't we? But we haven't had that since, and there have been sort of four to 500s. That you still do have these regular heavy nights which are horrific, but they aren't happening. Again, you would if you could, you aren't, so you can't. But that is still unsustainable. So even though I think the Ukrainians have probably kept the strikes to a more, I mean, let's have a look at this. I'm probably wrong in my recollection of the numbers, but I think that's what's going on. I'll take myself out of this just so you can see the graph more clearly. So we go to the drone graph. This is Dell's stats. Thanks to Dell for doing these. He's been doing these religiously all through the war. So we saw this kind of exponential growth here, but it's quite difficult to see. But there's a slight change in gradient over here. Now, what I really would like to see is this. On a slightly different scale, just looking at this sort of period here, because I was expecting these these are the interceptions. They aren't the total sent, of course, and I really like general staff don't release those stats. There are other people that I think have done those stats. If they do, actually, the problem is those blue infographics are what takes place overnight, and it doesn't take into account, I think, what takes place during the daytime as well, which is also worth looking at. We look at the data here of the drones that are shot down. So drones, here we have a record daily high of 626. What do we have? 7-day moving average at the moment, 347. Wow. So yeah, 30-day rolling average, 361. So that's an interesting number, because that 7-day rolling average, let's look at my drones. Yeah. So I don't know. I might have to reassess my thoughts there, because, okay. Right. Now that's interesting. Okay. Right. Yeah. What's going on here? Okay. Right, what's going on here is that these figures are taken from the brown sheets, which are the general staff. And I said this the other day. I said very clearly that the numbers you see here do not equate to adding to these numbers. So this is the overnight attacks, and these numbers are what takes place on a 24-hour period. But the cutoff is halfway through the night 2 nights ago to halfway through the night last night. And what you'll find is that even if you take into account like 2 days worth of these stats, they don't equate to these numbers. So these numbers are throughout the front line, and they do include, so it says operational tactical drones here. They do also include reconnaissance drones, I think, as well, and drone strikes through the day. So this then kind of changes, like, it's hard to see if my theory is correct from these stats, is what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is, at night, you are not seeing the massive numbers that you were seeing. But I think what you're seeing possibly is a real ramping up of drones being used throughout the day as well, and possibly a ramping up of reconnaissance drones too. So I don't know that I can use these stats to defend my thesis, or even to disprove my thesis. What I can tell you is that they are not sending 500 a night at the moment, and they would if they could. And so I think the Ukrainians have done something to the production, but it's not enough. They are still the great, the graph is still an upwards graph, where the Ukrainians need to do way more, and they need to blow up drone production facilities in Yellowbuga, 100%. Right. So last night, out of 90 Shahed drones, so we didn't actually talk about 101 sent over, 90 taken out. So wow, finally up to a 90% interception rate, give or take, which is good news there. So of the 90 that were shut down, 9 of them were taken out by a single type of drone called the Sting drone, created by the Wild Hornets team. This is one of the Octopus drone I was showing you yesterday. It looks like one of those it's got like 4 wings, and then the central component, central fuselage of it, and then the 4 wings coming out from it like that. That is the Sting drone that was first made by War Hornets. I think they first had that kind of design, and then loads of other drone developers have developed similar drones to that. Anyway, to take out 10% of the Shaheds getting taken down by this one type of drone is brilliant for Wild Hornets, but it shows how, I think, useful these interceptor drones are going to be, which is why the British and it's why Zelensky took, it wasn't a Sting drone, I don't think it was the Octopus drone, that the British are going to make 2,000 a month. That's why I took that to 10 Downing Street the other day, put it on show and said, we're going to be making these with the British. So the British are coming and making some of those. And of course, there are going to be other drone manufacturers making interceptor drones too. I'm sure the Germans are in on it too. Now, as far as what was struck last night, it was pretty hellish in Kyiv. Update 3 were killed, 29 injured in Kyiv amid Russian drone attack on residential buildings. Russia's overnight drone attack there. So it injured 29, including 7 children, according to the state emergency services. Here we have a video of no, we don't, because it's not behaving. So here is the explosion. You've just missed it there. So I'll turn the sound off. A big explosion there, and that would, I think, be on the residential buildings there. So 3 were killed. Locals say that people jumped out the balconies trying to save themselves from the fire caused by the attack. And there you can see it, horrific. So there's no surprise that a number of people died and quite a lot of people were injured, because that is a direct strike on a residential building. Clearly a residential building, whether it's on purpose or not is irrelevant. This is war, and Russia needs to stop throwing drones and missiles at a capital city in Europe. So it's 19-year-old woman, 46-year-old mother, and another person were killed overnight in these attacks. So really horrible scenes coming. Look at the hole there. Horrible scenes coming from Kyiv, unfortunately. And then yesterday daytime, after these strikes on what looked like a food warehouse, that's, I think, what this was, although they've got, weird like outlets and stuff. I was saying at the time it didn't look like a food warehouse, but apparently it was. That was actually on fire for most of the day, I think, yesterday. Crews were still tackling the blaze until the evening, and I don't know if it's out now even. Okay, then we have an attack, and this has been going on. All of them are now being taken out, Pierre was telling me. Attack on the 3rd wind turbine in Kramatorsk. Prior to this, the Russian armed forces attacked wind turbines on October the 22nd and the 24th. I've talked about decentralizing the power grid over the whole of Ukraine, and that actually, I think wind turbines and things like that are probably a better option than the massive but singular power producing facilities like a thermal power plant. But as soon as these are near the front line, they're easy targets, wind turbines. I mean, you can just send FPV drones into them. I'm talking about much further back in Ukraine, but really sad to see that, because obviously, that is taking out power to locals in the area that is already a horrendous place to be living. So Kramatorsk, the invaders are taken to hitting wind turbines. This is a 3rd windmill struck by drones in the past few days. Right. Now, I feel vindicated. Not that anyone would doubt what I'm saying. I don't think. It seemed pretty sensible. But I've been talking an awful lot about how the Russians just need to put their air defenses along the border going, because Ukraine have only got, the options of firing their drones across the Ukraine-Russian border. They can't fire them really from the sea. So they can't use the Black Sea in a way that Russia can use the Black Sea with their submarines and their ships. They also can't generally release they don't have the strategic bombers, so they can't release them from the air. So you have ground launch systems that are firing over predictable pathways over the Ukrainian-Russian border. And Russia, rather than have air defenses all around the massive country of the Russian Federation, which is, traditionally what you might think they would do, which is, here's a hydrocarbons facility, here's an air base, here's this, here's that, and we need to protect every single one of these. You don't need to do that, actually. You just need to line them all up along the border, and anything that comes across the border, you shoot down. And I think that's why I think Ukraine have struggled to get enough missiles and drones through that border area. And that's why, you know, you get a single drone or two drones hitting a facility, hitting an oil refinery, when actually they've sent 30 drones, because all Russia need to do is line up their air defenses along the borders. And that was my thesis. And I remember I spoke to Will Teal about this, and we were talking about that. And that's why you only get like small arms fire back at these refineries, because they don't need to have a panzer air defense there, because otherwise they need to put them all over Russia. Well, no, just bring them. You only need fewer of them along a smaller border rather than gazillions of them all over Ukraine, all over Russian Federation, protecting everything. So Will then sent me this today. Well, JP, your theory in our last session is proven correct with regard to concentration and placement of air defenses. What's he referring to? Well, Visioner here is quoting from Kirilo Budanov, the intelligence chief, saying, quote, "The strikes really have a clear effect as we managed to cut off Russia from the gasoline export sector. Successful deep strikes are due to the fact that most Russian air defense aircraft systems are concentrated near the border." Also, so if you, as long as you can get through that border area, then you're all right. You're basically not gonna. There's not that much chance of you getting shot down, going on that very long journey from the border area to the refinery. Your challenge is getting it over that border area. Also, anti-aircraft systems are concentrated only in the occupied territories, as well as near Moscow and St. Petersburg. So then, this is really interesting, because then this came out this morning, a crazy number of air defense positions, not necessarily actual air defense units or equipment, because they move them from position to position because they probably don't have enough. But anyway, these are the positions around Moscow. Green is Pantsir, yellow is S-300, red is S-400. Note that not all air defense positions have them. They move between them from time to time. So that is, you know, really, that is a ring of fire around the capital there. So again, exactly what Budanov is saying. Anti-aircraft systems are concentrated only in the occupied territories, as well as near Moscow, as you've just seen, and St. Petersburg would be similar. In other places, they are either not present at all or do not pose a threat to drones. When we bypass the system deployed along the border, our drones flight over Russia is always trouble-free. Boom, thank you. I have this real imposter syndrome thing where sometimes I just don't think I know what I'm talking about, or at least I'm speculating, because all I do, I don't have like military knowledge. I just use logic, right? And I just apply my kind of philosophical framework of like, here's a problem, how do you solve the problem? You know, here's a problem, Ukraine keep attacking us all over here. Well, okay, where are the pinch points, and what's the easiest way to solve this problem with the least amount of equipment? Well, you put them along the borders. That's your smallest area, because it goes out from there. And like trying to do things over here, no, we can concentrate our air defenses here. And so, you know, Bryansk and Kursk and Belgorod and Volgograd. Okay, that's where we need our air defense. Bish bash bosh, and there you go. And that's exactly what Budanov has said. So I feel somewhat vindicated. Not that it's any genius thing. I mean, it's pretty bloody obvious, but I just sometimes I worry that I'm not telling you things that are correct, because I'm merely speculating. But anyway, right, at night, so for the Ukrainians, over 10 explosions were heard in the Tula region. Air defense activity was also reported. Officials remain silent. We don't know what's happened. In fact, that's generally the case right across last night. Possible explosion in Russia's Protasovo airbase in Ryazan Oblast. Telegram channels reported a short video capturing a distant rumbling noise and a flash scene during it. But again, don't really know. What Ukraine need to do is, one, take out Yelabuga, but in order to take out Yelabuga, they need to take out those air defenses across the border. So somehow they need to be striking at, and that what they need to be doing is applying what the Primari unit are doing in Crimea. I said this the other week. They need to get the Primari unit and take them up to, in fact, I think I was saying this to Will Teal. They need to take them up to Sumy region and around there in Kharkiv region, and just obliterate air defenses north of the border in the same way, and the radars and whatnot, in the same way that they're done in Crimea. Because Crimea is kind of open season to a degree in Crimea. But then you're thinking, well, why aren't they destroying everything in Crimea at the moment? Well, it must be drone production. And then, well, why aren't they firing as many drones? So they're not producing as many. Why aren't they producing as many? Because their facilities have probably been hit by the Russians with their routine strikes on the Ukrainian military-industrial complex. Okay, how do you solve that? Then you protect them better with air defenses, or you build them outside of the country. So now you're starting to see localized production of Ukrainian equipment outside of Ukraine so that they can. So, there is no coincidence that Zelensky took that Octopus drone to number 10 and said, you guys build this. And the British are going to build 2,000 of them a month, because building them in Ukraine, I presume, is too risky. Build them in the UK, ship them to Ukraine, use them. We need long distance missiles and drones built outside Ukraine to protect them from having their facilities destroyed by the consistent ballistic missile attacks on Ukraine, and then ship them to Ukraine. Ukraine uses them, and they need to destroy Yelabuga. So they need to destroy the air defense systems north of the border first. And once they've done that, Yelabuga is open season on Yelabuga, as it should be open season on Crimea at the moment, but it probably isn't, because they probably can't build enough of these other drones, like the Beaver drones and whatnot. Okay, right. I talked to you yesterday about HIMARS strike on the dam at Belgorod. Images shared by Russian media show a slight drop in the Belgorod reservoir water level after the dam has begun leaking post-shelling. So goodness me, right, okay. We have water level dropping at the Belgorod Dam there, reservoir, and talking about it here. So anyway, I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but here we have evidence of strikes on the Belgorod reservoir, I presume, because it looks like they're trying to shoot down a drone. And it looks like they had some success there. That looks like a drone rather than a HIMARS. You wouldn't be using that kind of fire against a HIMARS missile. Okay, so moving on to other bits and pieces. We're going to start with Putin doing a bit of saber rattling. They say Russia successfully tested a 9M730 Burevestnik, a nuclear-capable intercontinental cruise missile with the ability to evade missile defenses. It flew for 15 hours or 14,000 kilometers, and that is a big statement to the Americans, I guess, given the sanctions and whatnot. And there's no coincidence that declaration came out. Syrskyi has been to the Donbass and visited I think he's threatened commanders for concealing the truth. Now, this is something the Russians need to do. This is a problem massively for the Russians, but it is also a problem for the Ukrainians. The commander reported that during a trip to Pokrovsk direction, he made categorical demands to the commanders regarding the inadmissibility of distorting and concealing information about the real situation in the directions in reports. It's sad, but it's human nature. People are going to be, trying to advance themselves or hide their own, shortcomings or whatever. So it's like, do not lie to me about what's been going on the front lines. That's what Russia does, and it gets them into all sorts of trouble. And maybe it's getting the Ukrainians into trouble as well. Okay, moving on to energy here. Some relief for Ukraine and its energy system. Moldova is reducing the tariff for gas transit by 50% for the winter ahead. In other words, any gas coming across Moldova heading for Ukraine is normally tariffed, and they're going to reduce that tariff by 50%, which is big for Moldova. It's not got a lot of money, and so, it's helping out Ukraine as much as possible there. The gas originates in Greece using the Trans-Balkan pipeline, with Greece, Bulgaria, and Romania giving the go-ahead for the discount there. Good news. Now, US sanctioned Russian oil giants Rosneft and Lukoil have lost a combined $11.55 billion in 5 days. That's good news there. That Lukoil loses 11.72% of its values, Rosneft 7.81%. Now, on the fuel side of things, Russian soldiers say that the army isn't issuing them with fuel for combat operations. They are trying to buy it with their own money, but are struggling to obtain it in Donetsk because only coupons are now being accepted for payment due to the ongoing fuel shortages. In a series of short videos filmed at an RTK gas station in Donetsk City, a man records a gas or petrol station attendant refusing his request to buy 120 liters of gasoline, despite his pleas of military necessity and people outside selling gasoline illicitly for cash. Well, that requires permission. That's prohibited, she says. Look, this is needed for the soldiers, for combat missions, for evacuees, for the evacuation of the wounded. I need 120 litres of gasoline. I can't give you that fuel that I don't have. I have some fuel left, but you can only have it by coupons, by order of the gas station management. Just now, cars were parked for money, selling gasoline for money, from the people who sold gasoline at the gas station for money. The man leaves a gas station and records a second video denouncing the operators and the drivers openly selling illicitly acquired fuel for cash. In short, quote, he says, in short, there's funny stuff going on everywhere with vouchers for money. It would be better if they sold it for money, but instead they use vouchers. What kind of joke is this? Nothing is more important than the lives of soldiers, and it's the same BS that's going on. What do you mean? Some kind of nonsense is going on. In the third video, he shows how the cost of fuel has soared in recent weeks. Quote, basically it's some kind of money-making scheme. 98, 78, 95, 92 are gone types of fuel. Some effing BS is going on. Basically, someone's effing raising prices and making money out of this. Yeah, all is not going well there. Now, Russia had their exports have risen 18% in 2024 to $330 billion. China remains Russia's top trading partner, importing $130 billion in goods, mainly oil, gas, and coal. India is now second, having surged past others as a key buyer of cheap Russian crude. Israel, Turkey, Egypt, Brazil, and Hungary also expanded imports. Some have noted that the EU is actually third in the list here, but I wouldn't see the EU as a single thing, although it is in a sense. I mean, it's the individual countries like Hungary that, this is the problem the EU is having at the moment. It's like, what do you do? How do you solve a problem like Hungary? They are still buying stuff. So anyway, an interesting infographic there showing you what's going on with Russian exports. And we come towards the end here with an audio clip of Trump being interviewed here. Question to Trump: what does Russia have to do for you to reschedule your meeting with Putin? Trump replies, we have to know what we're going to make a deal. I'm not going to be wasting my time. And actually, this is good. I like that, which is I'm not going to have a meeting with him and be strung along by him. I've got to know before I go to the meeting that we're going to have a deal. But the problem then is, you need to put more consequences on until he actually fully capitulates there. So this is a good start. Those two sanctioned oil, those two sanctioned hydrocarbons entities, brilliant, but keep going. I've always had a great relationship with Vladimir Putin. I love me some dictators, but this has been very disappointing, he admits. And then finally, Donald Tusk here, interesting one for you British viewers out there. Ukraine is prepared to keep fighting for Russia for 2 to 3 years. Okay, that's an interesting statement, and that's going to be derived from some kind of information. But worries about the war dragging on for a decade are there. So Poland's prime minister has said in a Sunday Times article. Donald Tusk also warned that the UK would be in the line of fire if the Kremlin were to attack a NATO country, and said he had been, quote, shocked by the level of public complacency about the UK's safety. I think this with Fox News and America as well, I think we need to have much more public warning of what Russia is doing on a consistent basis in cyber warfare and information warfare. I think we need regulation of our social media to get rid of online trolls and bots. I was on Twitter this morning, and just like the first bunch of tweets are from pro-reform but clearly not British people. They just say the same thing every day. It's a couple of these accounts that just get into my feed every day that just say, isn't Keir Starmer the worst prime minister we've ever had? He's the biggest liar, blah blah blah. And it's the same format questions that they are rhetorically asking every single day. And I know they're blue tick, they are not British people, and you look at their bios and it's all in the same kind of thing. I'm a patriot, I'm a family woman, and blah 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 blah. And you're like, no, you're not. You're none of these things, and you're not a real person. Or if you're a real person, you're Russian. But why are we not doing enough about that? Why are we not saying enough in public about how problematic Russia is? And the same with Fox News in the US. They should be showing Russian state media every day or on the news to show what Russia is saying about Trump and is saying about the United States. And we need to do that in the UK. We're quite like anti-Russia in the UK. justifiably so. You know, they've killed Litvinenko and you know, the Sergei Skripal attempt and all the poisonings and stuff that's taken place in the UK. We should be like, and we are kind of justifiably anti-Russia, but we need much more in the news about what Russia is actually doing on a daily and weekly basis, and what it could do and what it wants to do, you know, with Ukraine and with NATO, etc., etc. And so I think Donald Tusk here is absolutely correct, that there is a complacency in the UK, and we need to, I'm not saying we should be existing scared every day, but we need to have a really very realistic understanding of exactly who Putin is and what the Kremlin is and what Russia is and what their intentions are, and the same for every nation on earth, really. But yeah. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care. I'll speak to you soon. Really appreciate your support. Thank you.